management class. This is a one-year program for mid-career development professionals, although this class of 57 from 15 countries, roughly the profile is 40% come from government, including military, 40% come from the NGO or civil society sector, and 20% come from the private sector. So it's a pretty diverse group. And if you, unlike some of the other programs, this is an Asian institute, so this class of 57, we limited to 30% from the Philippines and 70% from around the region, South Asia and Southeast Asia, East Asia, includes Timor-Leste, PNG, and we have one from the Netherlands. The other interesting thing about this class, which we are quite proud of, is it's 46% women, which is rather unusual. We've always been around 25% women, so now we're almost 50%. And as we work hard on it every year, we are bringing more and more Asian Muslims into the program. So 30% of this class is Asian Muslim. So that's the composition of the group that you will be addressing today. So, ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, Dr. Hyun H from the
Thank you very much for the very good introduction. Maybe I don't. Okay. Let me start first, and then maybe when we have questions and answers session, we have lots of questions you can ask. Okay, so today's lecture is based on chapter 2 of one of the reports which I produced recently. You can download this one from ADB's website. It is called ADB's Support for Inclusive Growth. So I'm, as Dean said, I'm coming from independent evaluation department. So our department evaluates ADB's projects and programs to see how effective or relevant ADB's support has been in the region and also in particular countries. So the inclusive growth has been one of the main ADB's development agendas since 2008. So, the board has requested the independent evaluation department to do one evaluation study on the topic inclusive growth. So I took the lead on this study, although there are many members, So today's lecture is based on the chapter 2 of this report. The chapter 2 is about the analysis, some data analysis, and then it's to do with the region. And the rest is more ADB things, so you may be very bored to hear. So anyway, let me start with what is inclusive growth. I mean, this concept is relatively new in the field of development. But in recent years, several definitions have been proposed by Indian Planning Commission, World Bank, IMF, African Development Bank, and ADB. So World Bank, I think they toyed the idea of inclusive growth through inequality of opportunity in one of their main publications, WDR, World Development Report, in 2009. And then now they are talking about shared prosperity. So it is about inclusive growth. But their goal is to improve the welfare of bottom 40%. So it is called the shared prosperity by World Bank's definition. So it's good in the sense that the World Bank has a specific target, right? You have to only look at the bottom 40%. But the weakness of that approach would be when World Bank lends, infrastructure like transport and energy projects, then how are they going to target bottom 40%? You cannot just put the road or electricity grid in front of those who are in front of houses belonging to bottom 40%, right? So operationalizing that concept is challenge, but the good thing about that approach is it has target. And they only look at the bottom 40%, welfare of the bottom 40%. That's it. And IMF, according to IMF, growth is inclusive when inequality declines. That's what it is. Then that it is very similar to the concept of proper growth. In olden days, before the concept of inclusive growth came in, we development economists like myself were talking about proper growth. When I joined the World Bank, and we were talking about proper growth, and then I worked on operationalizing proper growth and all that. So when we are concerned about reducing inequality, then it becomes a measure of a proper growth. So then the question is, what is the difference between proper growth and inclusive growth? And then ADB, how do we define it? I mean, we see inclusive growth. ADB sees inclusive growth as means to poverty reduction. So, and then to achieve inclusive growth, there are three pillars. That's how ADB sees it. Growth, broadening economic opportunities in health, education, employment, and then also social protection programs. There are three pillars to achieve inclusive growth, and then ADB argues that all these three pillars need to come together to achieve inclusive growth. That's how ADB argues it. And the Indian Planning Commission and African Development Bank, along with many key dimensions of development, they tend to focus on jobs, employment generations. So these are broad differences. But whoever proposed or talked about inclusive growth, one thing clear is inclusive growth is a multi-dimensional concept. Then I want to go even one step further. It's not only multi-dimensional concept, it is a dynamic concept, looking at changes over time. And then you may ask how I think of inclusive growth. So in this report, we define inclusive growth constituting 4 social objectives. One is sustained economic growth. Second, poverty reduction, inequality reduction, and broadening access to economic opportunities. So I will talk about these 4 social objectives later on. My lecture is about those 4 social objectives. And then these social objectives, they are not independent of each other. They are related. So these 4 social objectives are actually means to achieving social well-being, where social well-being can be defined in terms of sense, functioning, and capabilities. So then to determine whether growth has been inclusive or not, then we need to look at the interactions or trade-offs of these 4 social objectives and then make a judgment. That's how this report is talking about. And then these are actually 4 social objectives. These are different dimensions of development. So we cannot actually, it's not good, it's not appropriate to come up with a single index. You know, we call it composite index, like human development index, right? Why do I say that? I mean, in my view, you know, you can construct a composite index using weight. I mean, weight is always the issue. Where you give more weight, because depending on country's priority, I mean, different dimension of development gets more priority. You know, maybe in the Philippines, jobs, job generation or employment generation is the most priority, but then other things. Then it should get the most, weight, the highest weight. So determining weight is controversial. So coming up with this, collapsing all these 4 social objectives into one single index. I mean, I was proposed, that when we talked about this inclusive growth report within ADB, and also when I had some discussions with experts outside ADB, they actually proposed me to come up with one single index, but I thought it was not appropriate because each of dimension or each of these 4 social objectives need to be monitored separately. Then what is point of coming up with the one single index by collapsing all different dimensions of development? So then let's look at the next page. So going to the first social objective, which is sustained economic growth. So growth needs to be sustained to help increase the average standard of living through greater income and consumption. So for this table, which presents annual growth rate of selected indicators in Asia, I mean, we have used data called the POPCAL. World Bank has POPCAL database. It provides information on this household income or consumption, and then also inequality measures, and then also poverty measures. At 2005, purchasing power parity, so that their comparison across countries can be made. So use the POPCAL database, and then we have selected 25 developing Asian countries, which represent around 2.9 billion in the 90s and 3.4 billion in 2000. So 25 developing countries include all big countries, India, China, Indonesia, and all that. So, but we didn't include the small Pacific Island countries because there were no data available. So based on that, this table and then tables that I will show you in the next slides, all the calculations are done based on that database. So according to this table, for instance, population, it says that population grew at an annual rate of 1.2% in the 90s, which reduced to less than 1% in 2000. So such reduction in population growth would have a positive impact on the poverty reduction. And as for gross domestic product, GDP, its annual growth rate was about 9% in the 90s, and then it became around 8% in 2000s. So, I mean, Asia had outstanding growth in GDP in the last 2 decades, right? And then when we look at the household consumption, it is a proxy measure of living standard. So when you look at this annual growth rate of household consumption, then it was around 5 to 6% in the last 2 decades. So then we can say that outstanding growth in GDP in Asia was not actually translated into improvements in living standards measured by household consumption to the same extent. So actually we calculated growth elasticity of consumption. So which means that when GDP grows by 1%, how much household consumption would grow? That is the elasticity concept. Responsiveness is measuring. So when we looked at the growth elasticity of consumption in the 90s, it was around 0.58%. So if I interpret that elasticity, it becomes like 1% growth in GDP led to growth in household consumption by 0.58%. It's like that. But it increased to 0.63% in 2000s. So here the point is that there is no one-to-one relationship between growth in GDP and the growth in living standard measured by household consumption. Actually, we also looked at country studies for Vietnam, Philippines, and a few other countries in the region. So for Vietnam, we calculated this growth elasticity of consumption. Then actually in early 2000s, it's actually in Vietnam, 1% growth in GDP led to almost 1% growth in household consumption. So there was almost a one-to-one relationship. But when we looked at the Philippines, it was interesting. During 2003 and 2006, there was around 3% growth in GDP. But actually, when we looked at the growth in household consumption, it actually reduced by 0.2%. So they don't even move to the same direction. So that's why Philippines is, when you look at the poverty reduction and the growth in the Philippines, and then we often say that the problem with the Philippines economy is sluggish reduction in poverty. And even at the moment, the Philippines is growing 6 to 7%, right, per annum, which is the highest at the moment. But the government is worried about sluggish reduction in poverty. So during 2003 and 2006, although there was increase in GDP, growth in GDP, there was positive growth in GDP, but actually poverty increased, so it went the opposite direction. So the government is struggling why it is happening. But I think it's to do with the labor market issues. So we may go into later maybe during Q&A session. And then, so the thing is that so it is there is wrong perception that high growth in GDP always leads to higher living standard. But according to our empirical analysis, it's not so. So what is important is actually the patterns of growth, not only the level. We often talk about high economic growth, but what is point of having 10% growth in GDP if people's living standard, living conditions are not improving? So there is no meaning of growth if people's quality of living is not improving. So what matters is it's not only about the level of growth. You have to have growth, but things that the patterns of growth that is able to translate growth into improvements in living standards. So, and then going to this second social objective. How inclusive growth is depends on whether growth is accompanied by poverty reduction. So poverty is very important, and then Asia is very good at that. There are two proud things for Asian economies. One is growth and the other one is poverty reduction. We are very proud of the two front. So, so if you look at this table, it shows average poverty estimates in Asia for three poverty measures: percentage of poor, poverty gap ratio, and severity of poverty for the past 2 decades. So these different measures of poverty, it's like percentage of poor is there is always a threshold. I'm talking about this international poverty line called $1.25 a day is a poverty line, and then $2 a day poverty line is a little bit higher. So those who live below this threshold, it's called the percentage of the poor. It's a head count ratio. That's how you count head count ratio. And then according to this table, we can say that almost 43% of Asian population lived under extreme poverty. But in 2000, it's around 24%. So you can see that there was rapid reduction in poverty, especially poverty measured by percentage of the poor, head count ratio. And then when we give weight more and more to the bottom end of the distribution, then poverty measure changes from percentage of poor and then head count ratio and then severity of poverty. So those, severity of poverty measures those who are stuck at the bottom of the distribution. That's what it means. So we should be, I always say that, we should be very much concerned about those who are stuck at the bottom of the end. When you go back, when you finish this study and then you will go back to your own countries and you will become policymakers, I assume. Then I think we should be concerned about those who are stuck at the bottom of the distribution, because these people, it's hard to identify, but these people are those who really need the help, and they need some case. They cannot do anything because they don't have any means to get out of poverty. So it's a generation by generation. I mean, poor remain poor. So these people need more help. So according to this table, what you can see is that Asia has made impressive progress in reducing absolute poverty, but still has the largest number of people living in absolute poverty. That's what it means. But it is actually, recently World Bank has brought out new purchasing power parity. I mean, these estimates are based on 2005 PPP. But the World Bank has recently brought out 2011 PPP, purchasing power parity. So these numbers will all change. At the moment, they don't have. So I think toward the end of the year or early next year, I assume that they will update all these numbers. Now, according to their preliminary finding, Asia is not the poorest region anymore. According to this 2005 PPP, Asia has the largest number of the poor in the world. But according to the new PPP, 2011 PPP, now Africa becomes the region with the largest number of the extreme poor. So I think the World Bank does not like that result.
Why?
Because the Asian, they invest a lot in Asia too, India, Indonesia, China, and all that, So if Asia is not the poorest region, not the region with the largest number of extreme poor, then they may not get much money, because they get the funding from the government, like Asian Development Bank, so we invest and all that, But if that changes, like Sub-Saharan Africa becomes the region with the largest number of the poor, then money will be, resources will be channeled to that region, isn't it? So now that's why we are actually developing agencies like ADB and the World Bank. We are talking about helping middle-income countries like China, Indonesia, and also India is in that rank too. So anyway, and then that's why they are trying to increase the poverty line. They are talking about $1.78 per day. So at the moment, the World Bank is reviewing their methodology. So let's see how they come up with. So this poverty line, this is it's very difficult exercise, but it's very ad hoc. The way they come up with, there are lots of methodological issues, and depending on where you draw the threshold, the number changes, So there are lots of problems and issues. And then also one point we can see from this table is that Asia's progress has been less impressive for poverty based on $2 a day poverty line. If we draw a higher poverty line, then poverty reduction, the performance in poverty reduction in Asia is not that impressive. And then this section is interesting actually. Inclusive growth should be concerned with the effectiveness of growth in poverty reduction. So how do we measure effectiveness of growth in reducing poverty? The degree of effectiveness may be measured by growth elasticity of poverty. This is one of measures, different scholars can come up with different methods, but it's one of the ways of doing it. And the growth elasticity of poverty is defined as the ratio of rate of poverty reduction to growth rate of GDP. So what this means is that when GDP increases by 1%, how much poverty will decrease? When there is a growth, the poverty always reduces, almost 80 to 90%. Hardly it moves in different directions. It's very rare. So that's why if you look at this elasticity, then it's all negative. There is growth when poverty reduces. That's why the sign is negative. So this table shows growth elasticity of poverty. It measures the effectiveness of growth in poverty reduction. So it presents elasticity for all poverty measures, 3 poverty measures, based on $1 and $2 a day poverty lines. So there are 2 results emerging from this table. One is effectiveness of growth in poverty reduction has improved substantially in the 2000s and 90s. So why do I say that? If you look at this, 2 figures, right, 0.82 and 1.37 for this first row here. So the elasticity was 0.82 in the 90s, but it increased to 1.37 in 2000s. So growth has become much more effective in the 2000s and 90s. That's what it means. And then another result is that growth in Asia has been effective in lifting people out of poverty line, but not very effective in reducing the income gaps of those who are not able to cross the poverty line. So when we look at this elasticity figures for poverty gap and the severity of poverty, this 2 decades. So basically, growth elasticity of poverty has 2 facets of poverty. One is how effective growth is in lifting people out of poverty line, so they become non-poor. So there are two kinds of people who are crossing the poverty line, and then another is those who are still in poverty, right? So when we talk about this elasticity, first is how effective growth is in lifting people out of poverty line. That's the first one. And the second is how effective growth is in improving incomes of those who are not able to cross the poverty line. So there are two facets of poverty. So by looking at the elasticity of severity of poverty and poverty gap ratio, first one dominates the second. So that's why I concluded that thing. By looking at elasticities for three poverty measures, elasticities for poverty gap ratio and severity of poverty are greater than elasticity for percentage of poor. So we can say that growth in Asia has been effective in lifting people out of poverty line, but not very effective in reducing income gaps of those who are unable to cross the poverty line. That's what it means. So from that conclusion, what we can say is that the point I made earlier. So it's extreme poor who are just stuck at the bottom of the end, bottom of the distribution. Those, the growth in Asia is not helping those people. So that's why the government needs to provide very well targeted social safety nets, for those people who are unable to cross the poverty line. That's the thing. And then this one is decomposition thing. There are various factors influencing an economy's performance in poverty reduction. So, why one country is very effective in poverty reduction, one economy is very effective and not other economies, but it depends on country experience. So I used this Philippines case, but I have done the same analysis for other countries like Bangladesh and then Vietnam and all that. So this is a decomposition method. It just explains the reduction in poverty in terms of some factors. So here I used 4 factors, main factors. So growth in GDP, growth in population, and then consumption elasticity, and then the inequality effect. So actually, when you look at this one, consumption elasticity effect, growth effect is a growth in GDP, the impact of growth in GDP on poverty reduction, keeping all other factors constant. It's counterfactual analysis. Okay? And then population growth is the same, keeping all other factors constant, the impact of population growth on poverty reduction. And then, consumption elasticity that we discussed, and then inequality effect, that this one measures actually the patterns of growth, how distribution, the benefits of growth, how growth benefits, the poor and the non-poor. So it actually measures proporeness of growth, so keeping all other factors constant. So if we interpret this one, I used this Philippines family income expenditure survey for 2006 and 2009. So the result is that if you look at this absolute for the first row here, this one, if I interpret the result, so by looking at this one, this is all additive, So actually, during 2006 and 2009, headcount ratio in the Philippines reduced by around 2% points. 2% points, not percentage, but points. So, and then it's because of each of these factors. These are all additive. You can add up, then it becomes around 2% and things like that. So growth effect is because of GDP growth. GDP growth led to reduction in percentage of poor by around 2% points. And then if you look at this population effect, it is a positive, isn't it, right? So during 2006 and 9, I think the Philippines had a population growth of almost 2%. As of now, it is less than 2%, like 1.8% or something. It reduced a little bit. But at that time, it had almost 2%, 2.1%, So it says it's counterfactual. So how do I interpret it? It says if population had not grown during this period, 2006 and 2009, poverty headcount measured by headcount ratio would have been greater by almost 1 full percent point. That's how it goes. Keeping all other factors constant. So, and then when I look at the last one, inequality effect. During that period, actually, Gini index, of the Philippines slightly improved, slightly declined. That's why it says it's negative. It's actually inequality reduction led to reduction in the percentage of the poor by almost 0.9 percent point. That's what it means. So this composition exercise is interesting in the sense that that people want to know why poverty reduces. Policymakers often ask that kind of question. Why percentage of poor or headcount, what is it, poverty gap ratio or severity of poverty reduces. And this sort of decomposition methodology is used to explain the change in poverty. And then going to the third social objective, actually growth that is inclusive needs to be broad-based, reaching as many segments of the population as possible while protecting the vulnerable and the poor, thereby reducing inequality. So what is the difference between the proper growth and inclusive growth? Actually, inclusive growth deals with the entire distribution of the population. And it's not about the poor. It's this entire distribution. But proper growth, it is about the particular segment of the distribution affecting the poor. That's what is the difference between the two concepts. So this table actually, this one shows the annual growth rates of inequality in Asia. This is regression results actually. It's weighted by population. So these growth rates of these inequality measures are actually calculated based on trend regression models, taking into account country and the time fixed effects. So when you look at this, different inequality measures, you know this Gini index, right? This is most widely used. As policymakers, politicians even talk about Gini index. But this Gini index is very simple. That's why a lot of people use it. This one is actually, it is very sensitive to income transfers at the mode of the distribution. So if the society is concerned about the middle class, then it is an appropriate measure of inequality. But Atkinson's measure, different measures of inequality. It depends on where you give the weight. It's a social welfare problem. So actually, this Atkinson's index, this one is sensitive sensitive to income transfers at the bottom of the distribution. And if you look at this quintile shares, it says 20%. So So it is actually the ratio of mean income or expenditure of the bottom 20% to the mean income or expenditure of the entire population. So the quintile share goes up, then inequality falls, and becomes like that. So it depends on where you give more weight. You can choose different measure of inequality. So if as policymaker, it's not actually if you want to see, actually your concern is more with the very lower end of distribution, then Gini index is not an appropriate measure. You should use like Atkinson's index. If you look at this Gini index, then you see 1.04, right? So it shows, it says that inequality in Asia has significantly increased at an annual rate of 1.04% in the past 2 decades. But if you use this Atkinson's index, it is 1.84, isn't it, right? The magnitude is much larger. You can see it. So there is a sign is indicated as this. We did a statistical test, and these are shown to be highly statistically significant at the 5% of significance level. So that's the inequality part. And then inequality is something recently everybody is talking about because of this Thomas Piketty's book, Capital in the 21st Century. I'm sure some of you must have read it, have seen it. Anyway, so the thing is that even IMF is talking about inequalities. They used to talk about structural adjustment, growth, and all that. But now they are talking about inequality, and they are saying that the growth will be hampered, because of inequality. I mean, the causation is running that way. I mean, used to be causation was running from like inequality to growth, right? So now, I mean, causation is running other way around. The IMF has brought out working paper on that. So they are talking about those things. So inequality is something that everybody is talking about nowadays. So anyway, and then going to the inequality of opportunities in Asia, and inequality is usually measured in terms of income or expenditure, right? But nowadays the concept of inequality is being extended to cover many other dimensions of living standard, like the inequality in health, education, employment, and also basic infrastructure services like access to health, water, and sanitation, and all that. So we did. It's not appearing in the graph. Maybe, yeah. It was tied to this little underlined one. Anyway, so we have calculated inequality of opportunity in primary and secondary education for selected developing member countries. DMC is like Asian, oh yes. So the DMC is developing member countries, ADB is developing member countries. So Asian developing countries. So these are all developing member countries for Asia, for ADB. So 7 countries. We have estimated inequality of opportunity in primary and secondary education. So we used the methodology proposed by World Bank called the Human Opportunity Index. you know. So if you say the 100, there, you know, it says that everybody has access to it. That's what it means. So the longer the bar is, the greater access to, you know, this specific opportunity. That's what it means. So from these two graphs, you can say that countries in the region have greater challenge in equitably ensuring that all children aged 12 to 17 years attend the school than ensuring that children over primary school age attend the schools. It's a kind of obvious result, isn't it, right? Because you know, there are higher opportunity costs to send the children to secondary school than primary school. You know? So, and then the next one is this opportunity of inequality of opportunity in access to safe drinking water and sanitation. Actually, Asia did very well in basic education, especially primary education. But when you look at this, you know, basic services, safe drinking water and sanitation, and performance is very poor actually. So Asia has to do much more in providing basic infrastructure services than basic education in terms of both access and equity. So these are the broad, yeah, that's it. Thank you. And then, I mean, these are, you know, 4 social objectives I have covered. So, you know, as I said, you know, when I was talking about the first slide, I mean, these 4 social objectives are actually very different dimensions of development, isn't it, right? I mean, the growth, inequality, poverty, and then broadening economic opportunities in non-income dimensions. So, given, I mean, a very specific dimension of development, it's not appropriate to combine, you know, all these dimensions and then come up with one single index. So that may not be appropriate. So I didn't do. And then that said, maybe instead of going to policy recommendations and responses, I'm sure you must have lots of questions on this. And maybe I talk about only one point on jobs. Here in the Philippines, they have a Philippines Development Plan. It's like, you know, I'm sure most of developing countries in Asia has kind of development plans, you know. So the latest, the current Philippines Development Plan, it focuses on jobs. You know, so I mean, one of the main concerns in developing Asia at the moment, not only developing Asia, even Korea, I mean Japan, and all Singapore and everywhere, the concern is jobless growth. I mean, the economy is experiencing some growth, but there are no jobs. So a lot of people with the college degrees enter the labor market, but the labor market is not dynamic enough to observe the new entrants to the labor market. So the government, I mean, they don't know what to do about it, you know. So the current government is talking about, okay, they will focus on a few sectors like tourism and, you know, the outsourcing sectors and call centers and all that, so that, you know, these sectors can create jobs. So all the development plans will be, you know, around those sectors, priority sectors to create jobs. So the government is, you know, the Philippines government is very much concerned about this growth with jobs. So maybe, you know, I talked about the first social objective, which is sustained economic growth, right? So inclusive growth, I mean, yeah, it's a very good concept, but to begin with, you have to have growth. Then maybe we can talk about, you know, how you share the growth. And unless you have growth, and we cannot talk about inclusive growth, global growth, and anything. So the economy has to have growth, but having growth is not enough. Growth with jobs, how do we do? That is the thing. The government is discussing. Not only the Philippines government, but a lot of governments in Asia. So I don't have specific answers to it, but maybe I can throw a few key issues that the governments in Asia are facing. So, you know, the economy is going through structural transformation, right? So they are moving away from rural agriculture sector to urban manufacturing and the service sectors. So people are migrating from rural areas to urban areas. And the fact is that manufacturing and the service sectors create the more jobs. In terms of the number of jobs, they create much more. The thing is that the number of jobs, I mean, that is not everything. It is the quality of jobs, productive jobs, and good jobs, you know. So, you know, people move from rural areas to urban areas, and they end up in, you know, in slum areas. And then they work 2 to 3 jobs per day to meet, you know, to get the subsistence level of earnings. I mean, that is the issue, you know. So productive jobs, you know, how do we create the productive jobs? That is the one thing. And even among educated people, this youth unemployment in Asia, I mean, that is the main issue. In South Korea, where I come from, almost 30 to 40% of unemployed people are actually college graduates. In China, in 2009 alone, there was 6 million college graduates. Most of them, they ended up, you know, doing very low-skill jobs, very, you know, low productive jobs. And then, I mean, they are unemployed basically, you know. So how to address this youth unemployment? I think even South Korean government is struggling with it. That's one of the issues. And then from, you know, these jobs, actually the private sector has to do, and the private sector is creating jobs, right? Mostly, but the government, I mean, they have to create, you know, proper environment for private sectors to do investments. I mean, that is the main key issue. But also, but thing is that from the government end, during crisis period, the government can do public works programs, like the South Korean government during Asian financial crisis. They quickly introduced the public works program so that those who are laid off could get some jobs, you know. So that's the thing. And India has a rural employment guarantee scheme. I mean, it provides, you know, some employment paying the minimum wage. But thing is that those jobs are not that productive enough. You know, if they don't have that kind of employment, you know, where else can they go? Oh, that's some issues. And then skills need to be developed in a way that supports growth in the economy. I mean, that is key issue. I mean, there is often debate on whether education should focus on training a small group of very specialized labor force, like a rocket scientist, or large number of basic skilled workers. I mean, that's the question the government is asking. Depending on that, the education investment in education will be different, right? So this rocket scientist or highly specialized labor force, I mean, they innovate the technology. The economy needs it to spur growth. But the thing is that these low skill, basic skill workers, they implement technology into production. So you need, you know, a bunch of people who can actually implement the innovation, you know. So then the question is, what is the optimal mix of rocket scientists and basic skill workers? So where do you find the answer? I think the answer should be depending on the needs of the labor market and how do we know the needs of the labor market. That's also the question. Maybe you may have answered. Yeah. So a lot of governments do not have those answers, and then maybe you can think about those and then maybe you can provide me with some answers. Maybe with that, I should stop. Thank you very much.
We do have time for questions. So. Yes, please introduce yourselves.
Ma'am, my name is Romel Rubiales and I'm from the Philippine Bureau of Customs. As far as I can remember, it was in 2013 when our president attended the APEC CEO Summit in Indonesia. And there, he stated that inclusive growth is it is a concept that transcends the understanding that it ensures the sustainability of societies and it empowers the citizens to act as economic actors that can contribute to nation building. Do you agree that that the inclusive growth is the new development paradigm for the modern global economy?
Cool. And then Jay. We'll take a few questions.
Okay. My name is Koen David. I'm from the Netherlands. Thank you for the presentation. A lot of interesting numbers, and I actually do have a few questions regarding them. Basically, more the background of them. There was in a few of the tables there were numbers from 1990 till 2000 and from 2000 to 2010, and those numbers changed quite significantly. So what I'm actually curious about is what caused those numbers to change, because I think if you go all the way to the back and you look at what policies you want to implement, probably those policies have something to do with the reasons why those numbers have changed. And I'm kind of curious why in the 90s 1% of economic growth had a different effect on poverty than it did from 2000 to 2010. Who's next?
Okay, Jane.
Good evening, my name is Jane. I really appreciate the operationalization of inclusive growth, but somehow I missed a clear recommendation on how to address severity of poverty, on how to cross people to the poverty threshold. And in the Philippines, I think we have two major recommendations. One is conditional cash transfer, and the other is an area-based looking at things. For example, in the eastern seaboard, the one that's always hit by typhoons, those are also the ones that are poverty-stricken. So Samar, all these areas in Region 8. So I wonder what would you recommend on these? Is it a combination of transfers, jobs in those areas like public works, for severity of poverty?
Okay. Thank you. First the question, yes, I do agree with the President. I think inclusive growth, I think it has become a new development paradigm, I think somehow. But it is a multidimensional concept. I think people talk about it because of that nature. And then poverty, when we talk about it, is now, it used to be like income dimension, but increasingly nowadays, it's becoming multidimensional concept. So I think that this inclusive growth is the same thing, this multidimensional concept. And then I think every government and every country, I think, is working toward that. It's becoming a new development paradigm. And then second question, why the numbers have changed? I mean, these are, it's a region. The region Asia is composed, in this case, is composed of 25 developing countries in Asia. So I'm just presenting the overall picture of it, So why it is changing and all these sort of things. Maybe we have done 6 country case studies in chapter 5 in the end, in this report. It talks about it. And it has to go to country-specific examples. why it has changed. Because if you look at the region as a whole, then it is difficult to say. What I'm trying to, I presented the aggregate picture of the Asia actually. So there, I mean, one country experience is different from another. So it's hard to pinpoint, why, say poverty reduced for Asia like that. But the specific reasons for the change in number should be country-based. So that explanation has been given in chapter 5 when we discussed all these 6 country case studies.
What might be a country that we can take a look at, just as an example?
I mean, Philippines and, for instance, Philippines, we looked at it and then actually sluggish poverty reduction. There has been growth, but there has been sluggish reduction in poverty. So we discussed, this structural transformation issues and then also this labor market issues and those things. So if you look at the chapter 6 of the report, then you may be able to find some answers. And when you look at the Bangladesh case, for instance, I mean, for instance, their inequality was, change in inequality was because of the increase in inequality in rural areas. So why it is happening was that it was remittance, because of the remittance it was happening. Remittances, they come in to rural areas, but the remittances are all going to rich households, So inequality in rural areas was increasing very rapidly. That was driving, the change in inequality in Bangladesh. So the explanation behind the numbers is very important, but the region as whole is difficult to see because it's just aggregate picture, but to find the specific answers or reasons for those change in numbers, and you have to go to country-specific cases.
We have one last follow-up. What about Vietnam? Vietnam would have been a relative success, right? In terms of improvement.
Right. I mean, that was
What happened in Vietnam's case?
in Vietnam case. I mean, that was growth was very rapid. Growth was driving rapid reduction in poverty, but at the same time, actually, they had the kind of socialist legacy. So they had quite good access to healthcare and education. So the government was implementing actually good policies for the poor and all that. So I think the growth was driving force for rapid poverty reduction. I think that was the main thing. Yeah. And then the question on recommendations for the Philippines. Again, I mean, if you go to chapter 5, and there is chapter 5 that there is a discussion on the Philippines, and then we talk about this, the effectiveness of a conditional cash transfer program. And the country, this case study was done by senior fellow at the PIDS actually. Yeah, so she talks about the reasons behind this, the sluggish reduction in poverty, and she's saying that that's because of the low education among the poor and those things that she's thinking.
Other questions? Harry?
Yeah, you said by citing the Bangladesh question about the remittance inequality. What the relationship between remittance inequality and poverty in Bangladesh? Generally, what we heard is from the different research paper is if there is inequality, if there is a remittance coming from the abroad, it will lead to the rise in the domestic industry because those remittances will be spent more on domestically produced goods and services. So in the long term, it will lead to the poverty reduction. Just for example, in the case of Nepal, ever since Nepal started going abroad for the employment, at the time we have rising inequality, at the same time we have reduction in the poverty. what's happening in the Bangladesh in this context? Due to what Bangladesh's experience is, does remittance is rising, leading to rising inequality, at the same time is affecting poverty reduction there?
I think the poverty actually in Bangladesh, poverty actually reduced. So, but we haven't disaggregated what is happening in rural and urban in poverty reduction. But we had some disaggregated number for change in inequality, and then actually when you look at the other country experiences, the inequality in urban areas increases much faster than actually inequality in rural areas. But in Bangladesh, it happened other way around. So, and then we had some discussions with the research institute in Bangladesh, and they were actually saying that it was because of the remittances, and they are coming to the rich household, and then that's driving the rise in inequality in rural areas. And then at the same time, there was growth, so poverty was reducing. But the thing is that, poverty and inequality, they can move in different directions actually. Poverty can decline, but inequality can rise. They don't move, to the same directions. That's why this is to do with the Gini index actually. Gini index, it does not have a monotonic relationship between, monotonic relationship with the reduction in poverty. That's why they are moving to the same different directions. So in rural areas, there was a reduction in poverty, but at the same time, they experienced the increasing inequality. Can happen.
In this context, can we say inequality is not bad every time for a developing country like ours? Inequality is not a bad thing. So experience that initial stage of development.
Right. I mean, some people say that there is good inequality and bad inequality. I mean, that's what they're saying. And then if you, also, the inclusiveness hypothesis is about that. During the early development stage, and you will see increasing inequality, it will fall. So good inequality and bad inequality, Martin Ravalian talks about it. But in my view, inequality is all bad. That's what I think. The thing is, the debate is that the rich people, say top 1% or top 5%, their income is growing much faster than the rest of the society, 90% to 95%, right? Then the society should be concerned about it. It's not only that, it's the concentration of income for those people. The thing is that, the children from the top 10% or 5%, they have access to the best education and healthcare, and they will go to best schools, and then they will end up in very high positions, and then they will become the decision makers, and it goes on and on. That's the thing.
So for poverty reduction, if I take reference from the low level equilibrium test, when it clearly says that at least at the initial, to get rid of the poverty, we need to have some level of inequality, because if you have high inequality, then only you will have higher saving, and from there the concept of big push will come. So when there is a higher saving, that will push you up. So a population will get out of the poverty.
That's what the literature says. But if you look at the experience of South Korea and Taiwan, it does not. That does not fall into that category. I mean, they had very equal distribution. When they were growing very rapidly, and they had a very rapid reduction in poverty. So I think that's why it is very important to have the high productivity in rural areas. That's how Taiwan and South Korea developed, right? In the 70s and 80s, the South Korea and Taiwan, through land distribution and all that. So they had a very equal distribution to start with, and then they had they took off, and growth was very rapid, and poverty reduction followed, and everything fell into. So your argument that I read very often in the literature, so that may not be the case. It depends on the case by case. So empirical issue.
last one. Ma'am, you have cited Piketty's capital as 21st century and rising inequality and how Kuznets came and Piketty itself debunked the Kuznets hypothesis. In the context of developing countries, what do you say like optimum inequality that will everyone will accept? Optimum inequality, any Gini ratio. Most time we say if cross 0.3 is bad. What's the optimal Gini ratio that will ensure the development and poverty reduction?
I mean, there is no optimum level of inequality. The thing is that in Asian countries, we use consumption expenditure as a measure of inequality. If you look at Latin American countries, they use income. So inequality of income is always higher than income of consumption expenditure. So you will see that Asian countries, they all present the Gini index, right? So they don't say whether it is based on income or expenditure and all that. So you will see Gini index in any Asian countries will be lower than Gini index of Latin American countries. So that's very misleading because the base is different. You cannot compare apples with oranges. But there is no such thing as optimum level of inequality. One method is the change, the change in inequality. The Gini index is also, it does not change, like poverty reduction. Poverty can change by like 10 percentage points or something like that. But Gini does not change like that. It is mathematically, it's constructed that way. Because it gives the maximum weight at the mode of the distribution. So even if it changes by 1 or 2 percentage points, and we should be alarmed about, So the index is constructed in such a way that it does not show such drastic change. So what we should be concerned about is not about the level, it is the change in inequality.
Okay, Young Bin?
It's okay. I think it's too late to get that. So when you... Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam. You just mentioned about that the high GPA does not mean life quality or living standard increasing in province. I just want to be curious about that. Do you have any data to show that if there is high GDP growth, that the living standard does not increase? Because from my point of view, and particularly for the inequity, both quantitative and qualitative measurement are very important.
The first table I showed, and that's the point I wanted to make, that the table shows the extent to which the economic growth is translated into improvements in living standard. There, we saw the figures like GDP growth, annual growth in GDP in the 90s and 2000s. It was around 8 to 9% over that. It was very high. But when you look at the growth in household consumption, which I used as a proxy for living standard, that was growing around 5 to 6%. So that's what I'm saying. Asia had the outstanding growth in GDP. It was almost 9%, especially in the 90s. It was over 9%. But when you look at growth in household consumption, it was around 5% like that. So there is a huge difference between the two. So that's what I meant by the high growth in GDP does not necessarily get translated into the growth in living standard measured by household consumption to the same extent. That's what I said. The table one, the first table. And then the conditional cash transfer. In the Philippines, there are 4 keys, right? So that's social safety net programs. you cannot use that as you know that what is that? That is a social safety net program, so it should be used, social assistance program, so it should be used to help those who are extremely poor. So it cannot be used to to everybody. If the government has money, enough money, okay, I mean you can use it. You can introduce a universal CCT program, but none of the governments are doing it. And I used to work in Brazil for some time. I mean, there, you know that very famous Bolsa Familia program, this conditional cash transfer program. So this problem with this social assistance program is that they are highly politicized. So during election period, then the government quickly introduces one program like Bolsa Familia, and during election period, and they were saying, oh, so many millions of households are covered under that, and then it will increase to another million, and it's a very political thing, So that sort of a social assistance program is good if they are well targeted, and that's the point I was making. So, but the targeting is part of administrative cost. So, I mean, it's expensive in the sense that the program has to identify who are the poor and all that. So, in developing countries, I mean, there is no information on accurate information on income. So, we do kind of proxy means testing to identify who are the poor and all that by looking at living conditions and all that. But it is expensive to begin with, but there is economies of scale of the period of implementation. So the cost gets spread out over the period, so it can be covered. But the targeting is very important for any social assistance program, like the CCT programs. So, but like in the Philippines, there are people, there are households who are extremely poor, and they need assistance like these conditional cash transfer programs. And then the poor families, I mean, sometimes they cannot afford to send children to schools, although primary schools are free. But this education comes with private cost too, lunch and uniform and transportation cost and all these sort of things. So these poor families, and they cannot even afford that much. That's why the government provides incentives to those households so that they can send children to school. So conditionality is attached. That's the difference. So not only conditional cash transfer programs, any sort of even school lunch programs or other cash transfer programs. I mean, they are needed to help those who are actually stuck at the bottom of the distribution.
Well, it's 6:30, and there's only so much time that we have for this forum. So join me in thanking Dr. Sun for the presentation. If there's anything that one of the things I got from Dr. Sun's talk was question of how do you get individuals out of the poverty line, which I guess is set at 125. In some cases, $2 per day. So it's how to get them over the poverty threshold. And those who can't get out of that poverty threshold, how then what do we do from a policy point of view to help them do better? Well, one of the things I wonder, it's not a question now, it's just something to think about, is something that was actually presented about 18 months ago by one of your colleagues, Natalie Cho. And it was really talking about the middle income, and we looked at the numbers in the population of 8 different Asian countries that were living between the $2 and $4 range, and then the $4 and $10 range per capita. That if the 125 or the absolute, below 125 is absolute poor, and the 125 to 2 are the poor, relative poor, the 2 to the 4 are actually above the line, but rather vulnerable. So that if there's any kind of crisis or external shock, those are the groups that slide back down. But even the 4 to the 10, I guess that's the middle income group, Harry, you're asking about. Those numbers seem to be quite small also, relative to the population. Certainly for the Philippines, pretty close to 50% are still below $4 per day. So so the vulnerable poor are really still a large number. And when you get to the groups that are really comfortable, those percentages are very small. So I think it's not only the poor that we're really talking about. We're really talking about just those who are just over the line, because that's a pretty big group that is also vulnerable. I wonder, this is, I think, part of the thing we need to think about. If there's anything, I don't know about you, but my learning coming away from this talk is that the inclusiveness of growth there's really quite a number of segments that will have to be looked at if we're really going to make each of our societies, each of our economies strong enough to be able to take care of our own people. So I think it's a lot of food for thought. The publication is available online. It is on inclusive growth.
ADB is a support for inclusive growth.
ADB support for inclusive growth. There's a PDF copy that you can get online. By the way, if those of you are interested, taking a look at what Dr. Sun was talking about with reference to Philippines growth, growth in the economy, but no reduction in poverty. I think it's contained in the publication that I think it was Dr. Norio Musui, the economist for the Philippines, who did that. And that's also available. I think that came out in 2012, I believe, for the Philippines. So it talks about growth, but no reduction in poverty, and tied to jobless growth. And I think really that's the story of this country.
His main argument is that the Philippines, there is no very small section, small industrial sector.
Manufacturing.
So he's saying that what the Philippines economy needs is developing this manufacturing sector. That's what he's talking about. But my view is that why do you need the things? If the Philippines economy like the Philippines has comparative advantage in the service sector, and service sector can create a lot of jobs actually, then the economy can develop it. If the economy does not have comparative advantage in manufacturing sector, then how does it go about? We need it. So there is debate on that, and then ADB, our independent evaluation department, is organizing evaluation week in September. So I invited, there is one session in inclusive growth, so I invited Escuera, the Deputy Director General of NEDA. So he will discuss those issues.
Very quickly, I think my view on it. By the way, I subscribe to Noyo's view that the problem with services is it's largely college graduates who are going to capture most of those jobs. And because we have such a low college graduate or college going rate, it's 25% of the cohort, of the age group. And of the graduates, only about 14% of that group will finish with a graduate degree or a university degree. Then really services is open to a very small portion of the population. Whereas manufacturing,
even a high school graduate can work in a factory, whereas in services, very few high school graduates will be able to go into the kind of, the BPO, KPO kind of jobs, which really pay well. So I do subscribe to the view that we have because of a very thin manufacturing base, we're not going to be able to hire the kinds of graduates, high school graduates, or even the high school, the ones who don't finish high school but finish the 10th grade. We won't be able to get them jobs. I think that's part of it. But don't mean to start another debate given the hour that we're in. We do have coffee outside and a chance to informally ask questions and mingle with each other. Join me in thanking Dr. Sun for a small note of appreciation. We're now known as the Zuellig, Stephen Zuellig Graduate School of Development Management, and this is really the biography of the man himself. So,